morning. You couldn't have picked a better song. That last song, if I chose a song for this morning, it would have been that one. I love Casting Crowns, but I particularly love that song. And I just love how God brings all things together through his Spirit, even when you don't necessarily communicate it, because that song is kind of what my testimony is about today. So, once upon a time, I was one of those people who thought I didn't have an exciting testimony. I was just your usual Christian kid who grew up in church, and that was it. But over the years, I realised that my story is of God drawing me closer to him. Recently, in my studies, I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my life and just standing back and seeing the bigger picture of God orchestrating it. So today I'm going to share some of my story, and probably a lot of you have heard it because I enjoy sharing what God does in my life to help encourage others. So I hope that encourages today. So I was fortunate to grow up in a Christian home. My mum became a Christian when she was pregnant with me. The church that we were in welcomed her in and loved her and helped to raise me. But around this time when I was born, my parents divorced, and my mum was a single parent with 3 kids. My brother and sister, who were 10 and 12 years older than me at the time, and me, a very, very unwell newborn baby, who my mum was so anxious of losing because she and my dad had lost a daughter 9 years prior at only 3 months of age due to heart conditions. So I was raised with my mum helping me know who I was in God and making sure that I knew that I belonged to him. When I was 7, I remember inviting Jesus into my heart, and I don't remember the date, the day or the time, but I remember sitting on my bed in my bedroom and praying with my mum. And I can say that I've never not known God. Often I remember throughout my life I was told that I was so sheltered, but now I realise that I wasn't sheltered. My mum was raising me with the foundations to view the world on of Christ and not of the shaky, uncertain foundations that the world offers. I did still experience worldly situations, particularly through my brother and sister because they were older than me. But I remember a specific time, again, I don't remember the date or time, but I remember when I was older looking at them and making the choice that I wanted to follow Jesus' way and continue in that way because I saw their lives and I saw where they were heading and the things that they were doing, and it didn't match up with what I knew God to be. My mum remarried when I was 7 to a beautiful Christian man. However, for some reason, I chose not to like him. And for my whole schooling life, I refused to talk to him or do anything with him unless I absolutely had to. And I honestly have no idea to this day the reason why, but the only thing I can figure out is that I was holding on to a lot of pride, even as a young child. Although this was my attitude toward my stepdad, God still worked in my life. My mum was also very unwell and often in and out of hospital. I would often wake up and she would have been taken by ambulance in the night. She had a congenital heart issue that was slowly getting worse. Most of my childhood, I was waiting for her to die. This caused me to be quite anxious. Whenever I would go and see my dad, I was anxious because I knew he also wasn't the healthiest person, and I had overheard my mum talk about him having sleep apnea and he's just going to die in his sleep one day. After this, I was forever scared that this would happen when I was there and I'd have no way to get home because he lived 45 minutes away. One day I decided to be brave and I said I didn't want to stay with him anymore, but I was too scared to say why, and no one ever knew. With this and my behaviour towards my stepdad, I was sent to counsellors and pastors and everyone who thought they'd give it a try to figure out what was wrong with me. This only made it worse for me, and I clamped down even more. And what I was feeling and and on what I was feeling, and I still said nothing. Unfortunately, leading people to make assumptions of what was happening. Hence, from that day, I hated counsellors and counselling. But in my high school years, when God started to show me who I was in him even more, God started to work on those things in my life that I needed to change. As I learned to become more like him, one of my favourite passages, and still to this day, and one that I know I have shared many times over and I always will, is Proverbs 3, 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. This verse was one that I adopted and helped me in my anxious moments remember whom I trust. Along with the prayer as a kid, please Lord, help me not to have a funny tummy and funny head, as I just didn't know what was going on in my body. But God was there. Later in high school, God really started to work on my heart towards my stepdad, but it still wasn't until I was probably about 19 that I finally surrendered the pride, and I rang my stepdad and I apologised and asked for forgiveness for the way I had treated him for so long. I can tell you what, I think about that now and it's exhausting to hold on to hatred for so long. And it's amazing to be freed of that. It still took time to break bad habits that I had formed over those years of how I spoke to him and treated him, but today we have a very good relationship. Around this time, when I was 19, my dad ended up in hospital and tragically died due to a hospital error in his care. Although he was there because of his poor treatment of himself from many years of alcohol and over-the-counter medication abuse and smoking. My dad did consider himself a Catholic, Easter and Christmas, and reminded me often that I'm a Catholic because I was dedicated in a Catholic church. But when Catholics are at end of life, the normal routine is to get a priest in and do the last rites at their bedside. During this time in the hospital, my auntie, so my dad's siblings, my auntie, my cousin and his brother, my uncle were there, and they asked me if I would share something at his bedside. So I got the opportunity to share part of, although my dad's ways were interesting, I knew that he loved the book of Job. And I got to share a message with his family in that time and my family that were there too, my siblings. And I realised what God was doing in me, through me, in my imperfections, to be able to share and shine a light into my family's life. It was really cool. Even the priest was like, that was really good, thank you. When I said my goodbyes to my dad and left the hospital for the last time, I remembered I cried on the drive home, but from that point on I felt numb about the whole situation, and I never cried again for at least another year. In this time was when control took over. I had been an overweight young person my whole life, and I had started to get fitter and lose weight, but when everything in my world at that time was out of control, with my dad dying, the situations with close friends that were confusing and complicated, my mum still very much unwell, everything was out of control, and the only thing I had control over was my health journey, which started out with intentions of being healthy so that I could hopefully avoid any health issues that my family struggled with, especially the heart disorder. But this ended up with me having an eating disorder, becoming completely controlled by everything food and exercise. I never ended up in hospital, but I was underweight and overfit, which affected how my body functioned. But it was the only thing in my life that was going right, or so I thought. I had many well-meaning friends try to talk to me about it, some telling me that I was being self-absorbed and mocking me, others calling me names, while others congratulating me for my success. I realise now how confusing that was. It wasn't until a close friend said directly to me that I had an eating disorder, which at the time made me so angry, but made me think, and I started looking into it and I realised it was true. God had worked on the pride in my life. Now the next thing was control. My own control of my life, not God's. The thing was, I wasn't doing it to look good or attract attention. In fact, I hated that about it. Even though physically I looked different, I felt unworthy on the inside of being cared about by anyone. I finally felt like I was accepted and not looked at and discussed, but I was still being bullied, but now on the opposite end of the scale. I couldn't win, really. And this too has taken many years to overcome. The only thing in this time was knowing that God loved me no matter what, and that I had to trust in him. And that was something my mum had always drilled into me, was that she loved me and God loved me no matter what. So God started his work in my life in this area. I was at a new church at the time, and I remember going up the front for prayer to break the chains. But I knew that this, for me, was over the eating disorder. But it was also at this time that God said it was time to move from the town I had grown up in. I decided that I would go to uni on the Sunshine Coast. And this again was terrifying, because even though I didn't live with my mum anymore because she was so unwell, she had to live in a semi-retirement village, I felt a burden that I should be close by to help her. But I talked to my mum about what God was saying, and she was amazing. She never ever wanted me to be there and be stuck. She always wanted me to live a life that she could never live. And she gave me her blessing, and she freed me to go. She really wanted me to do what God was calling me to do. So I moved to the sunny coast, Sunshine Coast, for anyone who doesn't know that. I had a little rental at the time. I finished up there, and a whole new journey began. And this was a whirlwind ride. My intention was to go to uni to study to become a nutritionist, but I realised I actually wanted to study psychology, go figure, because I hated counsellors and everything counselling. So I changed courses. However, during this time was when Scott and I became good friends. We had known each other off and on for a couple of years through a mutual friend, and when I moved to the coast, we met up at a Christmas show at one of the Maroochydore churches. After this, he kind of just stuck around like a bad smell, literally. I could not get rid of him. We talked a lot. He chose to hang out with me instead of all his other friends, apparently, which I just thought was weird. Eventually, we had the talk and decided that we did like each other, but we still wanted to get to know each other. This was only probably a month and a half after he wouldn't leave me alone. And we just stayed friends for a few months. And all of our other friends were so confused because they're like, but you like each other, you should be dating. But this was the best time. We had so much fun. And it was also necessary for me because God had to do some deep work in my life and heart where I had to let go of more control. I had to let someone in to love me in a way that I had never been loved before. And I was so scared of this experience. I remembered actually in this time a few years earlier at a work meeting, they had someone praying, and this random lady that I'd never met before praying over me and just asking for the fear of men and marriage to be broken. I had no idea what she was praying about, but it was in that moment that I realised what that was all about. But this was also part of the healing journey. I was very much a people pleaser, but this person loved me for who I was, and I never felt that I had to be someone who I wasn't. But I really didn't fully know who I was. I had grown up with my mum, again, always reminding me of God's love and her love, but I had never really learnt to trust men in particular. God healed me in trust and vulnerability and was making me hand over control to him. 2 months later, in April 2014, Scott asked me out. Then in that same August, a few months later, asked me to marry him. That was another time of God showing me that he was in control. Because at that time, I knew I liked Scott, but I wasn't in love with him. But God had told me at least twice before this that this was the person that I was going to marry. And then through a dream, the night before we got engaged, God spoke very clearly to me that this was the right thing. I knew we were getting engaged the next day because Scott made it very obvious. He doesn't do anything in halves, so the lead up in that week was very obvious. But I needed that. Then only a few weeks after we got engaged, my mum ended up in hospital, this time for the last time. I remember calling Scott at something like 5 a.m. to tell him what was happening. I'd gone back to Gympie at this stage to be close by, and Scott came and stayed with me for 3 days while we waited for her to pass, only leaving my side for a few hours to pick up my engagement ring, which we were waiting to get resized because he wanted me to have something happy. But God used this time again, and this was when I fell in love with Scott because I saw the person that he was and how much he took care of my mum in hospital, helping her make her comfortable, trying to fix things that were broken. She'd had enough sedation to knock out an elephant, yet she was still ripping her bedding and her clothes off and was so uncomfortable. We stayed in hospital overnight with her, and about 3 a.m. on the third morning, Scott ducked off to the loo, and it was just my brother and I in there, and she passed in that time so peacefully. I was sad, but it was also a relief to know that she was finally out of all the pain and sickness that she had lived with for so many years. And in God's perfect timing, I was not alone either. Scott and I got married in November that year. We had planned it as soon as possible because we wanted my mum to be there, which obviously didn't happen. But I had learnt in this time to trust God, to trust his timing and trust Scott. But with so much happening that year, I never did end up finishing that uni course. But I much preferred God's plans for me. Then started the next adventure of married life. We had learnt to trust God and stand firm on who he was for our lives. Scott went through a season of depression early in our marriage, which we saw God work mightily in. I had to dig so deep in this to get through this, but God again was faithful. After this, God called us out west. 1 minute, we were literally building our lives on the coast. The next minute, 2 weeks later, to be exact, we were in Blackall. This began the journey of learning to slow down. Another verse that has long been with me is Psalm 46:10, which says, "Be still and know that I am God." I've always struggled with this verse because I just physically can't sit still and my mind never stops thinking. But in our journey, God has been teaching me that it's not about my mind, my body, or my will, but about my soul. We have lived out this way for just over 8 years, out at Blackall, Aramac and surroundings for 3 of those years, where we learnt how to enjoy the simple life again, not realising how packed and busy our lives were on the coast, building amazing friendships with people, having some really ridiculous experiences. Feel free to ask anytime. We love sharing those stories. We also went through some hard times, one of them being our first miscarriage. We weren't really a part of a church at this time because there just wasn't one where we were. So we'd have to travel to Longreach, which was about an hour and a half via the back roads, although Scott did it at times faster. But we felt God saying in this time that it was time to move closer to people again because where we were was very isolating. We felt we had 3 options. Back to the sunny coast because we still had property down there we could go back to, Longreach or Emerald. But God didn't tell us what he wanted us to do. He let us choose. And we realised that no matter what that choice was, God was going to work in it. We decided that although closer to family, the sunny coast was just too busy for us and felt God had more for us out here. That's how we ended up in Emerald. Our choice was literally to be closer to better health services as we started a family because of my own health complications. When we first moved here, I was pregnant with Daniel and quite sick, so I quit my job before I even started. But in this time, I still struggled a lot with anxiety. Because of losing both of my parents, one of my biggest fears was losing Scott, as I had on occasion woken up in the middle of the night to make sure he was still alive, only for him to be rudely awoken. But then I had Daniel, and now I had 2 people I was afraid of losing, or that something would happen to me. And because of the fear of losing my mother as a child. Yet another thing that I had to give over to God. I've had to learn what it is to give everything to him. to know that his ways are better than my ways, and he hasn't given me my family as a burden to carry, but a gift to receive and to trust him with what happens with them. While I give my things over to him, he just asked me as a wife and a mother to remember a time that I walk in him and that he has it all. When I was pregnant with Faith, the anxiety was heavy again. And I remember a time when I was just really over this. And I said to God, I'm sick of this anxiety. Please take it from me. And in that very moment, he did. It was gone. I felt a settling in my soul that I had never experienced before. And since that day, I can't say that I've never experienced any anxiety, but I have been able to catch it and not engage in it and choose to put my trust back in God when that creeps in. I've realised that being still and knowing God is about my soul. The world can be whirling around me. Everything can be going wrong or maybe even right. Life can be busy. But being still is being able to stand amongst all of that, knowing who my Heavenly Father is and that I don't have to be the one in control. That's not my job. My job is to listen to him, to be with him, to allow him to move and speak and act, and then out of that peace and rest and comfort, I can be free to walk in him, knowing he has everything. I once was a person who had to always know the next move, who had to be in control, got anxious and was fearful of what others thought or the things that could happen. And I believe that I was a burden on everyone, only kept around because people had no choice. I'm not perfect in any of these areas, and I won't ever be until the day Christ returns. But I know I am set free in him. I wait for the moment's notice of God to speak and me to act. I've learnt what it is to trust in him, his understanding, even when it makes no sense at all. I'm starting to understand the secret of slowing down and being still in his presence in the chaos of life. Without centering my soul on Christ, nothing else will satisfy what was created for him and through him and by him, and the heaviness of life tries to crowd and crush out. But when he is my centre, I can truly know peace. I have so much to learn, and I'm excited for God to continue to grow and teach me and use me in new ways. And I know that the journey will always have highs and lows, but in it all, Christ is the rock on which I stand. That's my story. Thank you for listening. I might just pray if that's okay, and then hand back over to Steve. Lord, I just thank you that you are our God, that we were created for you, by you, through you. And I pray, Lord, as we all journey our life with you, Lord, that you will show us what you are doing in the known and in the unknown, Lord, and that most of all our souls and our lives can be centered on you. I thank you for the journey you've taken me on and the journey that I have ahead with my friends and family around me and those you bring along my path, Lord. And I thank you that we each have a story to share. I just give you praise, Lord, that you are everything and that you are all we need. And I pray for each person here today, Lord, that they will sense and know your peace and presence with them too. We love